Want to learn about public policy with a group of curious fellow learners? Apply for the 12-week graduate certificate in public policy. Early bird deadline closes 27th July.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. My name is Yusuf Unjhawala, acting scholar at the Takshashila Institution. Today I have with me Professor Anupam Manur, who is a professor of economics at the Takshashila Institution. And today we're going to talk about what's happening in the world, which is the world of tariffs, Trump tariffs. Anupam, welcome.
Thanks, Yusuf. It's obviously an extremely interesting period to, be a scholar of tariffs and international trade and so on. But I just thought that, right now, I think casinos around the world should stop taking bets on random things. Instead of betting on India-England test matches, which can be boring, I think everybody should start betting on what is going to be the different set of tariff rates on different products and for how long they'll stick.
What side of bed Trump wakes up every morning and decides to do something today?
I think it's going to be a lot more exciting than, football matches and cricket matches.
So let us get a broad overview. Trump is using trade as a tool, both as a political as well as economic, for whatever historical wrongs that he perceives has been done to the US. And he's using tariffs as a way to get his way around. And it is outrageous. He charges something. We saw what happened at the big tariff day, and then there was a pause to it. So why don't you just take it up from there and see what's happening and how do you see things go?
Yeah, so what I want to focus on today is maybe two separate things, right? One is look at the various kind of trade deals that have been signed, but I want to come to that later. The first thing I want to look at is how tariffs again have been used as a weapon of coercion, and this time it's against Russia. But the effects of that are felt by many other countries, right? So
you're talking of the secondary tariffs that Trump has announced.
Yes, I'm talking
Even
about
the
the
EU
secondary
is
tariffs.
also talking about secondary.
Correct. So there's two separate things that have happened. One, the NATO Secretary General, which is Mark Rutte, he gave a statement saying, we're going to put tariffs on all countries that do any kind of trade with Russia. Right. And so mainly that's going to focus on India, China, Brazil, for instance. But also, Trump has separately kind of threatened on this, which is he says that if Putin doesn't stop his military offensive against Ukraine in 50 days' time, then a whole bunch of tariffs are going to affect all countries that trade with Russia. So not Russia per se, because Russia is already, I think they're maxed out on the kind of sanctions they can put on Russia, but they want to choke the Kremlin's kind of lifelines. All kinds of economic lifelines. So what they're doing is they're targeting countries that largely trade with Russia. And India happens to be one amongst them. The third bit is a US Senator, Lindsey Graham, is pushing for something called the Sanctioning Russia Act of 2025. It's got bipartisan support now. It's got about 170 senators behind it. Trump is backing it as well. And listen to this. They're threatening 500% tariff on all goods exported to the United States by countries that buy Russian oil, gas, petrochemicals or uranium. So any kind of these goods that countries might buy from Russia and then you export anything to the US will attract 500% tariff. So whether it's 100 or 500, basically now there are secondary tariffs that the US or NATO is threatening the world with, or at least threatening the big countries who buy from Russia. As I said, this largely is going to affect India, China and Brazil.
How credible is the threat?
That's a big question, right? Whether it's going to be taco all over again, or whether taco, by the way, for anybody who's uninitiated into this, is Trump always chickens out, right? So whether taco will be validated or whether they go through with it, whether it's 100, whether it's 500, whether it's 50, doesn't matter. Interestingly, let me tell you this, in terms of, how credible it is, the oil spot markets did not move. Mm-hmm. For the last week or so, it's been around the 65 to 66, 69, $70 range. Even after these sanctions came, even these threat of secondary tariffs came into being, it didn't move. It was still at 69.
So the markets don't think this is credible.
The markets don't think it is credible. But nonetheless, I think for countries, they'd have to think about all their options, right? The way that India has responded to this is quite interesting because I see three distinct threads of their responses. One thread is what the foreign secretary kind of says, which is India's top priority is to secure its energy security. More than anything else, more than what you care about, the war in Ukraine or any other goal. For us, the most important thing is to secure, India's energy security, which I completely agree with. So that's one threat, and that's almost a thread of defiance, right? Saying we will not comply. But the oil minister, Hardeep Singh Puri, has given two other kind of threats. One, there's a tacit kind of acknowledgement of the cost and benefits of either things, right? So one, he says, India is in a position to actually comply with these tariffs, or at least to avoid these tariffs. India is prepared to comply, which means he's kind of saying that we can switch over.
So basically, we have diverse sources now.
We have diverse sources.
We'll just
so, for
go
example,
from Russia to some other countries.
Correct. So we, just 2 or 3 years back, we used to import oil from 27 countries. Right now, we import from 40 countries. So we are diversifying our sources. And he says, this is not going to affect us too much. There's that kind of thread, right? So saying that we are willing to comply. Of course, the other thread, and I'll come back to this economic bit in just a while, but the other thread is, of course, we'll always hit back at the double standards of NATO, because one, NATO for all this while has still been buying Russian gas for a long time, and even if they're reducing it now, they're still buying secondary oil, which is refined product from India, for example, right? So that is still the source of that oil is Russia. So we are calling out on their double standards. But let's think about what it means, right? India used to import about just about 2 or 3% of its overall oil import from Russia.
This is before the war.
This is before the war. So if you look at total oil that India needs of 100%, of which 10% was produced domestically, 90% was imported. Of that 90%, just about 2% came from Russia. But after the war, when there were sanctions against Russia, other countries stopped buying. India looked at that as as an opportunity, basically to get cheaper oil. And we started importing more and more and more, and it grew to 20%. And right now it's at about 35%. Right? So 35 to 40, estimates vary, but you can take that number as anywhere between 35 to 40. So for India, switching overnight from 35, let's say 35% or 40% to other sources is going to be expensive.
Is it? I mean, because it didn't take us too long to shift from 2% to 35%, which meant we went away from our traditional suppliers. So those traditional suppliers do have some capacity of oil, which probably has been taken over by the Europeans and others who came after that oil. But when the minister says there is a lot of diversification options available, I'm sure he's speaking from a lot of information where he knows he can get oil from somewhere else. But the larger question is going to be if in the geopolitical realm where if you suddenly go away from Russia, that's going to have its own implications because, we are old friends and things like that. So, but that's a different conversation altogether.
Yeah. So, there will be geopolitical ramifications, but I don't think that's really on the top of at least the petroleum minister's mind.
Yeah,
but
he wants cheap oil.
We want cheap oil, right? So, one, there's a logistical difficulty in switching suppliers, but I think that can be managed quite easily now. The bigger problem is that the prices are going to go up. So, if you switch from Russian oil, Russia was partially due to its desperation to get forex. They were selling oil at a price much lower than others, right? So, and we made those deals, and so we were getting cheaper oil. So switching away would mean that we just have to pay higher oil.
Also, there was a cap, so we were just going with that cap,
so there's
which is now lowered now to some $47.
Exactly, right? So there's now a lower price cap. So we were kind of benefiting from that lower price cap. So
just explain this. They have lowered the cap to $47 odd, 47.6 if I remember correctly. They are lowered the cap on Russian oil, and they also want to sanction. How does it work? I mean, on one hand, they talk of price cap, which means you're okay to buy at that price. And on the other hand, they're saying if you buy it, then there's a problem.
Yeah.
So there seems to be a disconnect.
There's all kinds of disconnect between, it's not like there's a unified kind of policy against this because the price cap is largely done by NATO and more of the European leg, whereas now the sanctions and tariffs are coming from the US. But if you think that even there is a unified kind of cohesive policy inside the US, then obviously we're mistaken, right? Because there are court cases against Trump on these tariffs. So internally as well, there's absolutely no logic. So these are two different prongs that they're trying. The price cap is essentially to make sure that Russia doesn't get too much per barrel. Right? If you say $47 per barrel, that's the maximum they can get, right? So that's the price cap. Now they're trying to do the tariffs as well in order to, basically they want to increase cost for others to buy from Russia and minimize how much Russia can get. So those are just two different prongs.
So then let's come to the main question, which is trade deal, right? India is pursuing a trade deal with the United States, and this predates Trump's big announcement on tariffs. India was quick off the block. As soon as Trump was elected, Indian trade delegation was in the US to figure out how we could do a trade deal together. When Prime Minister went to the US, it was announced by this fall there would be a trade deal. But a lot has changed since then. Trump has been absolutely, at his whims when it comes to announcement on trade, on tariffs and things like that. In recent times, there have been deals. Trump has announced deals, which is with Vietnam, Indonesia, Japan, and Philippines. And these don't seem a fair deal. Japan may be okay. It has accepted because those sectoral tariffs, and we should talk about sectoral tariffs, right? Sectoral tariffs are not going to apply to them. But for Vietnam and Indonesia, sectoral tariffs will apply, and yet they have opened up their markets. They are going to tariff at zero to the US exports, which will come into their country, but they have accepted 19 and 20%. So what does it say about this trade deal?
Yeah, so there's quite a layered question. There's a lot of things to unpack here. I'm going to pick up from still the oil bit. I'm not kind of still moved on from that. But just on that oil front, I think because it plays into this trade deal now. If there is a threat of 100% sanctions on 100% tariffs on one hand, and slightly, let's say, increased prices of oil on the other, I think the cost-benefit analysis is quite clear. Go for the higher priced oil rather than 100% tariff. But that's a probabilities game as well. It's not 100% probable that you would get the tariffs, but you'd have to play that game. So one thing that look at that. But the second thing, I think what you mentioned about how this feeds into the US-India trade deal by itself, obviously putting these repeated ad hoc tariffs on India is not going to generate a lot of confidence with the Indian negotiators or the domestic polity to make a kind of long term trade deal with the US, right? Because at one hand, you're trying to, strike a deal with the US. You're saying, we're going to make these concessions, you make these concessions, and let's get onto an agreement. But just as the agreement is even in the process of happening, you have the president who's willy-nilly saying we're going to impose 100% tariffs, we're going to impose 500% tariffs, and there's a whole bunch of these things, right? It's not just oil. For instance,
BRICS.
There's BRICS. So there's also a threat of 10% additional tariffs on BRIC countries if they, and I'm making air quotes now, but quote unquote, destroy the dollar. The fact that if they think that India and Brazil and China can destroy the dollar, then it shows how much confidence they have in their own currency.
No, India has repeatedly said that we are not in for de-dollarization. I mean, it doesn't even make sense for India.
Yeah, but nonetheless, right? It's not like he's listening. And so there's a 10% tariff on dollars. There's a separate tariff on, steel and aluminium of extra 10% or so on. There is a tariff of 25% on auto and auto parts. Then now he's threatening 15% tariffs, up to 100%, if I'm not mistaken, on pharmaceutical products because, again, that is destroying the American pharmaceutical. So
copper at 50% as well.
It's endless, right?
Endless.
So if these tariffs, ad hoc tariffs, keep coming up, then what is the point of the trade deal?
Yep.
Right. So that's part A. And we'll come back to this in just a bit. And part B is what the other countries are doing. So, and India gets to gain that. But let's deal with this idea first before going to the other countries. Do you think there is merit in now signing a deal at all?
I would say wait and watch because there is no certainty. How do we negotiate with someone who keeps announcing and keeps changing the goalpost? I mean, once you define a goalpost, which was done in February when the Prime Minister visited the United States, where they said this is our trade target of $500 billion by 2030, and these are the things that we will do, and we'll come at a beautiful trade deal, and these are Trump's words, right? Beautiful, everything is beautiful. So
big and beautiful.
Yeah. So, but now it's not the same. So I would suggest, can India wait and watch? I mean, August 1st, tariffs are looming, but we don't know how Trump is going to behave again. Or maybe India can get an extension because we have not got one of those letters, beautiful letters that Trump has sent to even his allies, like Japan. And Japan has done a deal. So is there a merit in India just keep on negotiating, appear as if a deal is imminent, but then we keep waiting and see how things materialize with other countries before we make any move?
I mean, that could be one strategy. And as it is, the good thing is I don't think India succumbed to the pressures of the deadline, right? There have been 2 or 3 different deadlines, and we've not necessarily succumbed to that and been in a hurry to sign trade deals. We've taken our time. I think very clearly you had Jaishankar and even the Piyush Goyal, etc., make these statements saying the deadlines don't matter to us. If we're going to get into a deal, we're going to take our time, we're going to do it our way. Which I think is generally the Indian approach towards these things, which is, normally I would blame them for it, but I think here it is fantastic. It works. Take your time, don't be in a hurry to sign.
That is because the other side is not negotiating good faith, right? I mean, we are all for free trade, but then there's no free trade happening over
There's
here.
absolutely no good faith at all here, right? It is a completely chaotic world where things can get upstaged at any point of time. So the first part is we have waited. Now the question is, how long do you wait? This is, for me, a game theoretical situation, right? As and when more countries start signing the trade deals with whatever percentages that they've agreed to, then I think that is when the pressure on you to sign a trade deal will also come about. Because right now, already, Vietnam and Philippines, along with, maybe Japan is not a direct competitor, but at least for sure, Vietnam, Philippines have agreed to trade deals at 19 and 20%. Come August 1st, we don't do anything. We get 26% tariffs. Right?
But the deals have not been ratified, right? I mean, it's not a done deal, so we don't know when the tariffs kick in, right?
No, we don't know. All of this is up in the air. In fact, the Vietnam deal, for example, is not even in that way finalized.
Yeah.
But this is the best guesswork, right? That this is where it's at. But let's say a time comes, since you're saying keep waiting and waiting until maybe Trump loses the midterm and then ultimately is out of office. But if we keep waiting, let's say there comes a time when your closest competitors, it could be within the subcontinent, it could be just outside, it could be your East Asian economies, next Mexico, etc. All of them, one after another, start signing your trade deals. And India doesn't. So there will be a disparity. So even if, for example, Philippines has at 19%, Vietnam at 20%, and India is at 26%, you're already immediately at a 7 to 6% competitive loss. This on top of course, the fact that India is never competitive in many of these things in any case, right? So then I think we're going to lose out a lot if we keep waiting. So that time pressure, I think, will ultimately bite at some point or the other. Do we give in or not is something that we have to agree. Because what's at stake is more than just the standard, so one, what's at stake is, of course, domestically, you still have the same sticking points. US wants dairy, access to dairy and agri, and that is the thing that we'll keep fighting on. We've not given that up for UK or Australia or EU. I don't see us miraculously turning around and saying, here you go, you get, complete free access here. So I think those are going to be sticking points. But I don't think India will agree to the kind of trade deal that other countries have. There is, like we talk about the US exceptionalism, there is almost an Indian exceptionalism in some of these things. For example, even when there was the clause of, not buying Russian defense systems and so on, we still got an exemption made for the S-400, right? You would know better about this than I do. But we did get an exemption made, legal exemption made through for that, right? And historically as well, we've kind of just about skirted the boundaries. Mm-hmm. We've also lost in the game. I mean, for example, we were kicked out of the GSP, Generalized System of Preferences, where India got much lower tariff rates than others. But there are other times when we've lost.
Especially we lost out on textiles.
We lost out on textiles. So I don't know if waiting will necessarily cut it. You could wait for a short period of time and maybe even be able to absorb the losses. But if it is sustained over a period of time, I think India is going to lose out on this.
No, but I'm not, when I say wait, I'm not saying we wait till the midterms, right? I mean, I don't think there is any harm in waiting for another 2 months or 3 months. I don't think, even these deals which have been announced by Trump are going to materialize anytime soon. We don't know when things are going to change. And what do we agree on? Because like we just discussed, there is an oil tariff which is looming, there is a BRICS tariff which is looming, and then importantly there are sectoral tariffs. For instance, if auto sector, which Trump has tariffed at 25% or 30%, India is a big exporter of auto parts to the US, I think $6 to $8 billion a year. If that is tariffed and that is not included in any trade deal, which is what has happened with Vietnam and Indonesia, although Japan has got a comprehensive thing, like everything is going to be 15%. But if India does not get there, Trump is threatening pharmaceuticals with very high tariffs. India is very big on pharmaceuticals. It's a very important part of our exports. Then what are we going to trade about?
Yeah. So I think, okay, so now let's look at the other countries, right? As you mentioned, and look at how those things have played out. There are 5 at least almost nearly confirmed / finalized trade deals. So there is the UK that paid at the base rate. So one big takeaway is that 10% is the new zero.
10% new zero.
Right?
That's what Trump has announced. Yeah.
So
So in Australia, its partner, which has historically charged very little duties, is going to pay 10%.
Yeah.
Or not going to pay. I mean, American consumers are going to pay, but that is what Trump says. They are going to pay 10%.
Of course.
Anyway.
So 10% is the new zero. That's the base rate. So on top of that, even of course the historical best friends UK have got it at 10%. So now you look at that as no additional kind of tariff. UK has got the best deal, 0%, with exceptions to auto sector. Right? They've got exemption to the auto sector. Vietnam faces additional 10. So 10 plus 10, which is 20. I think Indonesia and Philippines each pay 9% extra. So 19. As against, by the way, I think the original threat for Vietnam was much higher at 46.
46.
So if you compare it to that, they would, I think, walk away happy saying, we got it at 20% instead of 46%. We'll confirm whether that's good or bad. But, Indonesia and Philippines, again, 19% as against compared to the threatened rate of 32 and 20% itself. So Philippines, by the way, threatened 20, they got 19. Clearly not a good deal in that sense. Japan, the threat was 25, they got 15. Again, you could think about what that means, right? But many of these sectors, many of these countries, as you say, don't have sectoral exemptions. I think Japan and UK are the only ones who got sectoral exemptions for auto. The East Asian countries did not necessarily get that. So what should India do? One, if you ask me, 2 or 3 things that are important that kind of stick out, right? One, I think India's got to negotiate very hard on exit clauses, which is to say that the minute US puts any kind of these additional tariffs, then they just exit the deal.
For instance, all these
As I said,
oil
the
deals and brick and
So,
all kind of things, yeah.
On whatever has been agreed upon, that holds true, irrespective of what kind of external geopolitical environment comes about. Now, is this going to stop Trump? Absolutely not. But it basically then says, you get an exit clause, that's it, right? And you end up with a much higher tariff rate. Because if you don't do that, then this will never stop, if you ask me, right? Today, there's no limit to external possible threats, right? Tomorrow they'll say, you did something else which we don't like, so therefore I'm going to put tariffs on you. Or if you look at this entire Russia, Ukraine, India thing.
It's a non-trade thing.
It's a non-trade thing. It's got nothing to do with trade, and yet, the tariff has been weaponized. So, and then now you're talking about the idea of India using non-dollars as again, and the excuse to put tariffs. So there's no end of such excuses. The pharmaceutical one is a domestic excuse. I want to protect my pharma, so therefore I'm going to put tariffs, right? So I think one of those things is you got to put that, or if you can, and this really then depends on the ability of Indian negotiators to do this, but you should be able to put in a compensation clause saying this is what we have agreed upon. If you put any additional tariffs more than that, you got to compensate me for that.
How would that work out? I mean, what would the mechanism of that?
There are such mechanisms available, but the problem is who will enforce it.
But WTO is dead. I mean,
exactly.
for all practical purpose, I mean, that's failed.
Exactly. So again, enforcement will only happen through the exit clause. So you don't compensate, then exit. Again, but if you exit, you'll end up loser. So there's no easy way to win at this at all, because you're dealing literally with a madman, right? With absolutely no discipline or adherence to any form of rules. But I'm saying at least having these clauses might at the margin deter just by 1%, right? Or at least if nothing works out, why would you make those massive concessions by not getting it? So if not anything else, you will stop from making those random concessions, right? So that's the first kind of strand of thought of what India should do. The second bit is, I don't think India should go the way of the East Asian economies. That is making 100% concessions. If you ask me, most of those countries have gotten a bad deal, right? And I am a strong proponent, as maybe many of the listeners know, and you would definitely know, for freer trade.
Yep.
And that we should, as it is, decrease our, import tariffs.
For our own good.
For our own good, right? Unilaterally reduce our import tariffs. But with US and Trump right now, I don't think that holds true, right? You can't give away and make massive exemptions while the other person keeps putting tariffs on you.
Even these deals, right? He's got zero duties from Indonesia, from Japan, and in return for 15 and 20%. I mean, if you look at it, Trump would go on and say that this is the art of deals, and I've shown that it works. And for his domestic audience, that'll be great. I mean, but it's not a fair deal. It's not a fair deal. And it's going to be very difficult for the Indian government to sell it to the Indian public.
Completely.
Any deal which shows us bending. I mean, this is
Completely.
what has happened with the Southeast Asian countries. That's what it comes
It's
across.
a terrible deal, and unfortunately, it sets a terrible precedent for other countries. But there you have it. That's the
But
cards
the
we've
third
been
point
dealt.
has to be on the sectoral tariff, right? If India is
Yes.
negotiating trade deal, we cannot have sectoral tariffs.
So, correct. So, the final bit is that we have to negotiate on all sectoral tariffs. So, whether it's auto and auto parts, because for us, auto parts mean a lot, not necessarily finished auto, but auto parts mean a lot.
Yeah.
Pharmaceuticals, and of course, any other potentially new kind of thing, even steel, for example. We are not big exporters of steel, but good to have that in the way as well. But mainly pharma.
So since 10 is the zero, do you think, quote unquote, clean deal, because there's nothing clean now, right? Say a UK kind of a deal where the US charges us 10% in return for us giving some concessions, and there'll be no sectoral tariffs and all that you say about, right? No other tariffs going to be applicable on India, be it oil or anything. Do you think that kind of a deal would be acceptable to us, and will the government be able to politically sell the deal in India?
So, firstly, I mean, when we say what concessions we make, we can make some concessions, which is to say, I mean, I genuinely don't mind if the US gets a bigger entry into our dairy market, for example, because I don't think on dairy, I mean, we had this conversation earlier, right? I don't think they're competitive. They'll come into the whey market, for example, and that's okay, right? And in fact, it's good. If you ask me, long shelf life, they can't compete with Nandini.
They can't compete, or Amul.
Or Amul, right? But I think where they will compete is the longer shelf life, the cartons, the packaged milk, for all of those
But those
things.
are expensive items. It's not going to impact our farmers over here.
Exactly.
There are some of the things that we don't even manufacture in India. All kinds of exotic cheese and things like that.
So
It's not
let them come through on that, right? But I don't think we can ever agree to a deal where we are at 0% tariff on US goods and they put 10% on us. I don't think that is acceptable.
But then it's now kind of a non-starter, right? Because Trump has very clearly said it's going to be 10%. That's the new zero, as you said, right? And even their closest ally, the UK, has accepted to 10%.
Yeah.
So which means that for us, that 10% is going to be the base.
So I think what will happen is that I think we will argue that we can't give 0 or they can't put 10. So it's either 0 bound on both sides or it is 10 on either side.
Yeah.
And even if it is less than 10, I think we are going to use all forms of non-tariff barriers, right? Which we will do, whether it's explicit, implicit. I know Trump is going after non-tariff barriers as well. But I think this is a game, ultimately, though I can't believe I'm saying this, Yusuf, but I think I agree with you, which is it's a game of delay and this thing, right? Try and get as much as you can through this. And then you will find other ways to kind of block trade.
Yeah, so the reason why I said delay is even assume that 26% tariff. And we don't know it's 26. Tomorrow I said just because India didn't do a deal, we are going to announce 50%. I mean, completely possible.
Very much so.
We will actually probably be advised to kind of wait out and see how it impacts our exports, and then do the cost-benefit analysis. And if you look at the larger picture, there is a great, the comprehensive strategic partnership. There are more dimensions to that than just trade.
But here's where I think that's what the US is, I mean, if you ask me, kind of shot itself in the foot, right? Even, as I said, somebody like me who is always harping on the idea that we should get a good free trade deal with the United States. Now I'm no longer sure that I have, in good conscience, I can make that argument anymore. Because I don't think the other party is going to play ball at all, right? And that's what the US has done. Even and this is just on the trade front. Other people such as you on the geopolitical front who've been arguing, for example, for closer ties with the US, generally, again, you don't have good standing now. Because if you can't be a reliable trading partner, how do you expect them to be a reliable, partner in geopolitics? And
in the geopolitics, the US's own allies are now jittery about it because he does not believe in the traditional form of alliances. But in this entire conversation, we have not talked about China. Where do you think this whole tariff thing with China, between the US and China on tariffs is going to go? And that is also going to impact India. So how do you see that?
It will. I think I know only one thing for sure, that whatever said and done, China will not get as good a trade deal as any of these countries or India could potentially get. So which means China will start off with at least 10 to 15% kind of deficit in the tariff scheme, right? As in, so they start with a 15% kind of handicap on tariffs. Minimum. It could be much more. I don't think it's going to end up anywhere close to 100, 250 because Trump or at least maybe one person in the entire Trump administration who would understand economics will tell them that that level of tariffs on Chinese goods would just mean runaway inflation in the US.
So
right? So you would probably end with much higher tariffs on Chinese goods for sure, but they will also eventually come to some form of trading agreement. But it's going to be much higher than what.
So where does this place is China plus one?
Again, I think at the margin there will be countries, I mean, there will be both companies trying to move out of China, do other kinds of trade deals and so on. But I don't think necessarily India is in a great position to capitalize, as always, right? There are many others who are waiting in this thing. So for example, even in this scenario, if India remains at 26, Vietnam is at 19, as it is, Vietnam has a competitive edge on many other fronts. Companies will just go, set up in Vietnam and then export to the US, right? If at all, if this kind of stands. So that, which is another reason why India needs to get that trade deal done and try to get as good a favorable trade as possible.
There are no easy answers.
There are no easy answers. But the final bit is for India to truly diversify, right? Which we have been doing.
So diversify in what?
Trade. We've got a trade deal with Australia.
One with UK is going to be signed.
UK is going to be signed. I think just drop this thing and get one with the EU. That is absolutely important for us.
Also, just before we end, and this is going to be the last question, the US trade delegation, the negotiators are going to be in India sometime middle of next month in August. That is after the deadline of the new deadline is going to pass. What will your 2 or 3 points to Indian negotiators be?
I think it's just then a summary of the things that we've said, right? So one, argue for no further changes in your trade deal. So once a trade deal is signed, then you can't have these ad hoc trades. So argue as hard for that and negotiate for that as possible. Sectoral relief, and combine that with things like immigration, by the way, immigration and services. Make sure that remains open and free. And I think the third bit is to, try and get as close to 10 as possible.
On that note, I mean, this is for our viewers. Anupam is as free trade proponent you can get in the world, and he's advising caution on a trade deal with the US. And that itself is a message to the US to negotiate in good faith and get a deal done. On that note, thanks listeners for tuning in today. Thanks Anupam, it was great speaking with you.
Thanks Yusuf.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.